Marcus Chen stood in the processing line at Coalition Station Omega-7, watching aliens of every conceivable shape and size receive their official designations. The Thanirian in front of him, all 8 feet of crystalline carapace and razor-sharp appendages, was tagged as Warrior Class Alpha. Behind him, a delicate-looking Wispin with gossamer wings and translucent skin received a Scientist Class Beta designation. When Marcus reached the scanner, the machine hummed for exactly 3 seconds before printing out his identification card: human. Civilian. No combat rating. The processing technician, a 4-armed Kelton with compound eyes, barely glanced at the readout. Next station for civilian transport assignments, it chittered, already waving the next person forward. Marcus looked down at the gray card in his palm. After 15 years in Earth's Special Operations Division, after campaigns across 3 continents that were still classified, after earning enough commendations to paper his apartment wall, he was apparently just another civilian looking for passage to the outer systems. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so dangerous. He pocketed the card and made his way to the civilian transport hub, where families clustered around departure boards and merchants haggled over cargo space. The next ship to the Kepler sector wouldn't leave for 6 days. His daughter Emma's 7th birthday was in 8 days, back on New Geneva in the Tau Ceti system. The timing would be tight, but manageable. What Marcus didn't know was that his seemingly insignificant misclassification had already begun rippling through the Coalition's vast information networks. In databases across a dozen systems, his profile appeared exactly as the scanner had read it: human, civilian, harmless. The Vrex Imperium Intelligence Division noted the human's arrival at Omega-7. Standard protocol for monitoring Coalition movement. Nothing remarkable about civilian transport passengers. The file was archived automatically. On Calthera Prime, Warpriest intelligence officials added Marcus's profile to their database of Coalition non-combatants. Another soft human traveling on peaceful business. Not worth additional surveillance. In the Zephyrian warfleets patrolling the neutral zone, automated systems logged his civilian status. Rules of engagement clearly stated that non-combatants were to be ignored unless they interfered with military operations. Marcus spent his first day on the station reading, exercising in the civilian fitness center, and video calling his daughter. Emma showed him the gap where her tooth had fallen out, and they discussed whether the tooth fairy had faster-than-light travel capabilities. "Daddy, when are you coming home?" she asked, her 7-year-old face serious on the small screen. "Soon, sweetheart. Daddy's just finishing up some work out here, and then I'll be back for your birthday party. I promise." "You always keep your promises," Emma said with the absolute certainty of a child who had never been disappointed by her father. Marcus smiled, unaware that keeping this particular promise would require him to do things that would reshape how the galaxy viewed humanity. On his second day, the first incident occurred. Marcus was having coffee in the civilian lounge when he noticed the commotion near the station's central hub. A family of refugees, the parents, tall, graceful beings with silvery skin and large, dark eyes, were trying to calm their 3 children while speaking rapidly to a Coalition official. "I'm sorry, but civilian transport to safe sectors is completely booked," the official was saying. "The next available passage wouldn't be for 3 weeks. Please," the Krenali father said, his accent thick with desperation. "The children, they have nightmares since the bombing. We cannot stay here so long." Marcus watched as other civilians turned away, uncomfortable with the family's distress but unwilling to get involved. Coalition stations could be dangerous places, and most people kept their heads down and minded their own business. The Krenali mother was crying now, soft silver tears that caught the station's harsh lighting. The youngest child, barely more than a toddler, clung to her leg and made small, frightened sounds. Marcus finished his coffee, stood up, and walked over. "Excuse me," he said to the Coalition official, his voice polite but carrying an undertone that made the man straighten unconsciously. "I couldn't help but, over here. Is there really no available space?" The official, a middle-aged human with the soft look of someone who had spent his career behind desks, glanced at Marcus's civilian designation and relaxed slightly. "I'm afraid not. The refugee situation from the Krenali system has overwhelmed our transport capacity. These are the facts."
Marcus nodded slowly. I see. And what about priority reallocation? Emergency protocols for families with children?
Those require military authorization, the official said, his tone becoming slightly condescending.
This is civilian transport we're discussing.
Of course, Marcus said. He looked at the Cronali family, noting the way the father's hands shook, the mother's exhausted slump, the wide, frightened eyes of the children.
Probably hadn't slept properly in weeks.
Marcus pulled out his personal communicator and made a call that would have surprised the coalition official if he'd been paying attention to the routing codes.
Admiral Chen's office, came a crisp voice. This is Marcus Chen requesting to speak with my father.
3 minutes later, Marcus handed his communicator to the increasingly pale coalition official.
Admiral Chen would like to speak with you, Marcus said politely.
The official took the device with trembling hands. Whatever he heard in the next 2 minutes left him standing at rigid attention despite the fact that he was supposedly talking to empty space.
Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir.
Priority authorization immediately, sir. When he handed the communicator back to Marcus, his entire demeanor had changed.
The Cronali family will be on the next transport to Sanctuary Station, he said. Priority accommodation. No charge.
Marcus knelt down to the youngest Cronali child, who had stopped crying and was now staring at him with curious eyes.
It's going to be okay, he said gently. You're going somewhere safe now.
The child reached out and touched Marcus's hand with one tiny, silver finger.
As the family gathered their belongings to move to priority boarding, the mother approached Marcus.
We cannot repay such kindness, she said, her voice musical even through her accent.
You don't need to, Marcus replied. Just take care of those children. What Marcus didn't realize was that the Cronali had one of the most sophisticated informal communication networks in the galaxy.
Within hours, word of the human who had helped them would spread through refugee communities across 3 systems. The human who spoke politely and, then, made people in power change their minds immediately. The human whose civilian designation somehow carried more weight than military rank. The human who helped children sleep safely. But that was just the beginning. On his 3rd day, Marcus encountered his first alien criminal. He was walking through the commercial district when he heard the sounds of a struggle from a maintenance corridor. Marcus paused, listening. 3 voices, 2 speaking the guttural Threx language, 1 crying in what sounded like Deltan. Marcus had been planning to mind his own business. Really, he had. But the crying voice was young, and fear was a universal language. He slipped into the corridor and found exactly what he had expected. 2 Threx thugs had cornered a young Deltan courier. The Threx were built like armored bears with opposing thumbs, and the Deltan looked like he'd blow away in a strong wind. Credits. Now, one of the Threx was growling.
All of them. Please, the Deltan whimpered. This is all I have for my family's medicine. Marcus cleared his throat.
The 3 aliens turned to look at him. The Threx took in his human appearance and civilian designation and dismissed him immediately. Walk away, Softskin, the larger Threx rumbled.
This is not your concern. Marcus considered this. He really should walk away.
He was supposed to be maintaining a low profile. But the young Deltan reminded him of one of his daughter's friends, earnest and scared and trying to do right by his family.
You're right, Marcus said. It's not my concern. But I'm making it my concern.
The Threx laughed, a sound like grinding stone.
1 civilian human against 2 Threx warriors? You must be joking. Marcus wasn't joking. What happened next took approximately 15 seconds.
When it was over, both Threx were unconscious on the corridor floor, and Marcus was helping the shaken but unharmed Deltan to his feet.
Are you injured? Marcus asked. No, how did you? They were warriors. Are you hurt? Marcus repeated patiently. No, sir. Thank you, sir. I mean, how should I address you?
Marcus handed him the credits that had fallen from his pouch.
Marcus is fine. Get that medicine for your family. As Marcus walked away, the young Deltan stared after him, then, at his ID scanner, which clearly showed the human's civilian classification. The Deltan worked for the largest courier service in the sector. By the end of the day, every courier in 3 systems had heard the story of the civilian human who had dismantled 2 Threx warriors to help a stranger. Station security found the unconscious Threx an hour later. When they regained consciousness, neither could explain what had happened. They remembered approaching a human civilian, and, then, waking up with concussions and restraint cuffs. The security report listed the incident as assault by unknown assailant. Marcus's name never appeared in any official documentation. On his 4th day, Marcus met Captain Voss. The captain was human, a thin woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and the kind of bearing that suggested she'd seen her share of combat. She approached Marcus in the observation deck, where he was watching ships come and go through the massive bay windows. "Marcus Chen," she said. It wasn't a question. Marcus turned. "Do we know each other?" "We have mutual acquaintances," Voss said. "I served with Colonel Martinez on the Titan operation." Marcus nodded. Martinez had been a good officer and a better friend. "How is she?" "Retired to a farm on Proxima Beta. Growing vegetables and raising hell with the local agricultural committee." Voss paused. "She sends her regards." They stood in comfortable silence, watching a massive Caltharian freight hauler maneuver through the traffic patterns. "Interesting identification you're carrying," Voss said eventually. "Bureaucratic error," Marcus replied. "Aha. And you haven't bothered to correct it?" Marcus shrugged. "Sometimes it's useful to be underestimated." "Is that what you call what happened to those Threx? Underestimation?" Marcus looked at her sharply. "How did you? I make it my business to know what happens on my station," Voss said. "Especially when it involves former Special Operations Division personnel wandering around with civilian tags." "Your station?" "I'm the Assistant Security Chief." "Which means I'm the one who has to explain to Coalition Command why 2 Threx criminals suddenly developed massive head trauma and retrograde amnesia." Marcus waited. "Lucky for you," Voss continued, "they were wanted for 17 different crimes across 6 systems. No one's going to cry about them getting a taste of their own medicine." "Good to hear." Voss studied his profile. "You know, there are protocols for correcting classification errors." "I'm sure there are. It would just take 1 call to Coalition personnel. 5 minutes, maybe 10. Marcus turned to face her fully. "Captain, are you planning to make that call?" Voss met his gaze for a long moment, then shook her head slowly. "I have a feeling that call might cause more problems than it solves." She was right, though neither of them could have imagined how right. On his 5th day, everything changed. Marcus was in his quarters when the alarms began. Red lights flashed in the corridors, and the station's automated voice announced, "All civilian personnel report to emergency stations." This is not a drill. All civilian personnel report to emergency stations. Marcus grabbed his go bag and headed for the civilian evacuation areas, but something made him stop at the first observation window. What he saw made his blood run cold. 3 Vrex battleships had dropped out of hyperspace dangerously close to the station. The Vrex were humanoid but larger, with thick gray skin and a reputation for taking what they wanted by force. They were technically at peace with the Coalition, but Vrex peace was usually just war waiting for an excuse. As Marcus watched, the lead battleship launched a spread of what looked like warning shots across the station's bow. The message was clear: submit or be destroyed. Marcus made his way to the civilian emergency area, where hundreds of non-combatants huddled together in barely controlled panic. The station's defense coordinator, a young Coalition officer who looked like he'd never seen actual combat, was trying to maintain order. "The situation is under control," he kept saying. "Coalition reinforcements are en route." But Marcus could read between the lines. Coalition reinforcements were hours away. The station's defensive capabilities were minimal. Omega-7 was a trade hub, not a military installation. And the Vrex were broadcasting their demands on all frequencies.
they wanted the Kranali refugees.
Apparently, the family Marcus had helped wasn't just fleeing from random violence.
They had witnessed Vrex forces committing war crimes against civilian populations. Their testimony could expose illegal Vrex activities and, potentially, restart a shooting war. The Vrex commander was giving the station 1 hour to hand over the refugees, or they would take them by force.
Marcus looked around the crowded emergency area.
He found the Kranali family huddled in a corner, the children pressed against their parents, all of them understanding exactly why the Vrex had come. The youngest child, the one who had touched his hand, looked at him with those large, dark eyes and whispered something in her native language.
The universal translator rendered it as, "Are the monsters coming for us?"
Marcus knelt down beside the family.
"What did you see?" he asked the father quietly. The Kranali man's hands shook.
"They destroyed a civilian shelter.
Children, elderly, just murder." "And you have proof?"
"Recordings. Data files. Everything needed to prove what they did."
Marcus nodded.
He looked at the frightened children, then, at the hundreds of other civilians packed into the emergency area.
Families, traders, refugees, travelers. All of them depending on coalition protection that was nowhere to be found.
He stood up and walked over to the defense coordinator.
"Officer, I need to speak with the Vrex commander."
The young man blinked. "Sir, that's not possible. All communications are being handled through proper channels." "Officer," Marcus said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made people stand straighter without quite knowing why, "patch me through to the Vrex battleship.
Now."
Something in Marcus's tone made the coordinator forget about protocols and proper channels. His fingers moved across the communication panel before his brain caught up with what he was doing. "Channel open," he said, looking slightly dazed.
Marcus activated the communicator.
When he spoke, his voice carried to every speaker on the station.
"Vrex Commander, this is Marcus Chen aboard Coalition Station Omega 7.
There was a pause, then, a harsh voice responded, "Human civilian, you will clear this channel.
We speak only with military authority." "I understand your position," Marcus said calmly.
"But, I'm afraid I can't allow you to take the refugees." The laugh that came through the speakers was like grinding metal.
"You cannot allow? You are civilian.
You have no authority here."
Marcus looked around the emergency area. Every eye was on him.
The Kranali children had stopped crying.
"You're absolutely right," he said. "I have no authority at all. I'm just a civilian trying to get home to my daughter's birthday party."
He paused, and, when he spoke again, something had changed in his voice.
Something that made the hair on the back of everyone's neck stand up.
"But, those refugees are under my protection now. And, I don't care if you're Vrex Empire, Coalition Fleet, or the monsters from children's nightmares.
You're not taking them."
The silence that followed stretched for long seconds. "Human," the Vrex commander finally said, "you do not understand what you face.
We are Vrex battleships. We have weapons that could reduce your station to atoms." "I understand perfectly," Marcus replied. "The question is, do you understand what you're facing?" Another pause. "What is your military designation, human?" Marcus looked down at his identification card one more time. Gray text. "Civilian. No combat rating." "I don't have one," he said. "I'm just a dad who wants to go home." The Vrex commander's response would haunt him for the rest of his life.
"Then, why," the alien voice said slowly, "are you the most terrifying thing I have encountered in 30 years of warfare?" In his quarters on the lead battleship, Commander Thekvar stared at his tactical displays.
Every scanner showed the same thing. The human who had just threatened 3 Vrex battleships was classified as a civilian non-combatant.
But, his instincts, honed by decades of survival in the most violent conflicts the galaxy had to offer, were screaming at him to retreat. Something was very, very wrong with this picture. And, in the emergency area of Coalition Station Omega 7, Marcus Chen stood surrounded by hundreds of people who were beginning to understand that their quiet fellow passenger was something far more dangerous than any of them had imagined. The youngest Krenali child tugged at his sleeve.
"The monsters aren't coming for us," she whispered.
Marcus smiled and gently ruffled her silver hair.
"No, sweetheart. The monsters are going away now." He was right. Within the hour, all 3 Vrex battleships had jumped to hyperspace without explanation.
And, across the galaxy, intelligence services began asking the same question: who exactly was Marcus Chen? Marcus Chen boarded the civilian transport Wandering Star 12 hours after the Vrex battleships retreated. The departure had been delayed while Coalition investigators tried to understand why 3 warships had simply vanished from sensor range rather than pressed their advantage against a defenseless trade station.
The official report would eventually conclude that the Vrex had received new intelligence about Coalition reinforcements.
The truth that a single human civilian had somehow convinced them to leave was too ridiculous to include in any serious documentation. Marcus had hoped the incident would remain quiet, but he quickly realized that was impossible.
The Krenali family insisted on traveling on the same transport as their protector, and they weren't the only ones.
Word had spread through the refugee communities, the courier networks, and the informal channels that connected every civilian in Coalition space. The human who made the Vrex retreat. The civilian who spoke with the voice of authority. The man who protected children from monsters. The Wandering Star was an old but reliable the Deltan server, a different individual from the courier he'd helped, but clearly from the same species, took one look at his identification and immediately began speaking in rapid, excited Deltan.
"You are the Chen human," the server said in heavily accented standard.
"The protector of the small ones. Please, honored sir, your meal has been prepared with greatest care." Marcus looked at the elaborate spread being placed before him.
"I just ordered the basic protein ration." "Is not good enough for Chen human," the server insisted. "You take special meal. No charge.
Is honor to serve protector of refugees." Before Marcus could protest, the server had vanished back into the kitchen, leaving him with what appeared to be the finest meal available on the ship.
Similar encounters followed throughout the day.
The Thanirian merchant who insisted on upgrading Marcus's cabin to first class. The human businessman who quietly picked up his tab in the observation lounge. The Kelton engineer who shyly asked if Marcus might record a message for her children back home. "They ask about heroes," she explained, her forearms gesturing nervously. "I tell them true stories are better than fantasy."
"You protected Krenali children. This makes you hero to my children."
Marcus recorded the message, feeling increasingly uncomfortable with the attention.
He was just trying to get home. He wasn't trying to become anyone's hero.
But, across the ship's passenger manifest, a pattern was emerging that would have alarmed military intelligence services if they'd been paying attention. Nearly 30% of the passengers had some connection to the refugees, couriers, or traders who had spread word about the civilian who faced down Vrex warships.
They weren't traveling by coincidence.
They were traveling because they wanted to be near him. Dr. Sarah Kim, the ship's chief medical officer, was the first person to figure out what was actually happening. She was a former Coalition fleet surgeon who had retired to civilian service after seeing too many battles. When she reviewed the passenger manifest and cross-referenced it with the communication logs, she realized the truth. Marcus Chen wasn't just traveling with an unusual number of refugees and displaced persons. He was traveling with an entire informal network of people who had been helped by someone they couldn't quite categorize but absolutely trusted. The realization troubled her enough that she requested a private meeting. Marcus was in his upgraded cabin, trying to video call his daughter, when Dr. Kim knocked on his door. The connection to New Geneva was patchy. They were passing through a region with heavy quantum interference, but Emma's face appeared on his screen just long enough for her to wave and mouth "Love you, Daddy" before the signal cut out. He opened the door to find a middle-aged woman in medical blues studying him with the kind of analytical gaze that suggested she was accustomed to diagnosing problems that weren't immediately obvious. "Dr. Kim," she said, extending her hand.
"Ship's medical officer. May I come in?"
Marcus stepped aside, gesturing her to the cabin's single chair while he remained standing.
"Is there a medical issue?" "Yes and no," Dr. Kim said. I've been reviewing our passenger manifest, and I've noticed some unusual patterns. Marcus waited.
37 of our passengers have been directly or indirectly helped by you in the past week.
Another 22 are traveling specifically because they heard about what happened at Omega 7. She paused. Mr. Chen, do you realize you're traveling with an entire support network?
I'm just trying to get home, Marcus said.
I believe you.
But the people on this ship don't see you as just another passenger.
They see you as.
She searched for the right word.
Protection.
Safety.
Hope. Marcus sat down heavily on his bunk. That's not what I want.
I don't think it matters what you want anymore, Dr. Kim said gently. Word is spreading through channels that coalition intelligence doesn't even know exist.
The refugee networks, the courier guilds, the civilian traders who move between systems carrying more than just cargo.
She pulled out a small data pad and showed him a series of communication logs. These are encrypted messages that have passed through our communication array in the last 12 hours. They're not using official channels, but our equipment picks up the routing data. She highlighted several entries.
Look at the keywords. Marcus scanned the data.
Chen Human appeared 17 times.
Protector Civilian showed up in 12 messages. Rex Afraid was mentioned in 8 different transmissions. They're talking about me.
They're talking about what you represent, Dr. Kim corrected.
Someone who helps people without expecting anything in return. Someone who faces down warships to protect children. Someone who.
She paused again.
Someone who what?
Someone who makes powerful people afraid without using power themselves.
Marcus looked out the cabin's small porthole at the stars rushing past. Dr. Kim, I just want to go to my daughter's birthday party. I know. But, Mr. Chen, I think the galaxy has other plans for you.
She was right, though the full scope of those plans wouldn't become clear for several more days. The first sign came when the wandering star stopped at Kepler Station for routine refueling and passenger transfer. Kepler Station was a massive hub that served as the gateway between the inner systems and the frontier colonies. More than 50,000 beings passed through its docks every day. Marcus was in the station's civilian quarter, trying to find a gift for Emma's birthday, when he noticed the crowd. It started small, a few Deltans who recognized him from the courier networks. Then, some Krenali refugees who had heard about the family he'd protected. Within an hour, word had spread through the station's informal communication channels, and Marcus found himself surrounded by several hundred beings of various species.
They weren't asking for anything.
They weren't demanding his attention or expecting speeches. They were just there, watching him with a mixture of hope and reverence that made him deeply uncomfortable. A young human woman pushed through the crowd, carrying a small child who couldn't have been more than 3 years old.
Mr. Chen, she said tentatively. Yes? My name is Lisa Grant. This is my daughter Amy.
She shifted the child to her other arm. We were on Krenali Prime when the attacks happened.
We saw what the Rex did.
Marcus looked at the little girl, who had the wide-eyed, shell-shocked expression of a child who had seen things no child should see.
Amy hasn't spoken since we escaped, Lisa continued.
The doctors say she's traumatized. But, when she heard the other refugees talking about you, about how you protected the children from the monsters. Her voice broke slightly.
She asked me if the Protector Man could make the monsters go away forever.
Marcus knelt down so he was eye level with the little girl.
Hello, Amy, he said softly.
The child looked at him for a long moment, then whispered, Are you the man who scares the monsters?
The entire crowd had fallen silent, waiting for his answer. Marcus thought about his daughter, safe on New Geneva with her grandmother.
He thought about all the children who weren't safe, who had seen their worlds burned and their families scattered by conflicts they couldn't understand.
Sometimes, he said finally. When I have to. Amy nodded solemnly. Good. The monsters should be scared.
She reached out and touched his hand, just like the young Krenali girl had done days earlier. But, this time, Marcus realized that something fundamental had changed in how the galaxy saw him. Station security had to escort him back to the wandering star through corridors lined with beings who simply wanted to see him pass. They didn't cheer or call out. They just watched, silent and respectful, as the civilian who had faced down warships walked among them. Captain Torres, the wandering star's commanding officer, was waiting for him at the airlock.
"Mr. Chen, we need to talk."
Torres was a veteran spacer, a compact man with the kind of steady competence that came from decades of hauling passengers safely between systems. His office was Spartan and functional, decorated only with certificates of safe passage and a few personal photos. "I've been getting interesting communications from other ships in the area," Torres said without preamble.
"Captain's asking if the Marcus Chen is really aboard my ship.
Trade vessels requesting to dock near us.
Military commanders asking for confirmation of passenger manifests." Marcus said nothing.
"I've also been monitoring intelligence chatter," Torres continued.
3 different governments have opened files on you in the past 4 days.
The Vrex Empire has issued a standing order for their ships to avoid any vessel you're traveling on. The Caltharian war priests have declared you a person of significant interest."
"Captain, I haven't done anything illegal." "I know.
That's what, Chen, in 40 years of running passenger service, I've never had a civilian passenger who generates this kind of attention."
"The question is, what are you planning to do about it?" Marcus considered the question. What was he planning to do? His original plan had been simple: complete his consulting contract in the outer systems, catch transport home, arrive in time for Emma's birthday party. Standard business travel.
But that plan had started falling apart the moment the Coalition scanner had marked him as a civilian. Every action he'd taken since then, helping the Krenali family, stopping the Threx thugs, facing down the Vrex commanders, had been reactive. He'd just been trying to do the right thing in the moment. Now, apparently, doing the right thing had made him into something he'd never intended to become.
"I just want to go home," Marcus said. "I understand that. But, Mr. Chen, you need to understand something. You're not just a passenger anymore. You're a symbol.
And symbols don't get to just go home." Torres was right, and Marcus was beginning to realize it. Over the next 2 days, as the wandering star made its way toward the Tau Ceti system, Marcus watched his fellow passengers treat him with increasing deference. The Krenali family had started calling him honored protector. The Deltan courier had begun leaving small gifts outside his cabin door. Even the human passengers had started referring to him as Mr. Chen with a formality that suggested they saw him as something more than just another traveler. Dr. Kim stopped by his cabin again on the evening before they were scheduled to reach New Geneva.
"How are you holding up?" she asked. "I feel like I'm in someone else's life," Marcus admitted. "In a way, you are.
The Marcus Chen who boarded this ship is not the same person who will disembark tomorrow."
"I never asked for any of this."
"The best leaders rarely do."
Dr. Kim smiled.
"You know, I served in the Coalition fleet for 15 years.
I've met admirals and generals and politicians who commanded thousands of people. But I've never seen anyone inspire the kind of loyalty you've generated just by helping people. It's not loyalty. It's gratitude." "No, Mr. Chen. Gratitude fades. What these people feel for you is something much deeper. They trust you. They believe in you.
They think you can protect them from things their own governments can't or won't."
Marcus looked out at the stars. Tomorrow, he would be home.
He would see his daughter, attend her birthday party, return to his normal life. The incident at Omega 7 would fade into just another story, and, eventually everyone would forget about the civilian who had faced down Vrex warships. But, even as he thought it, Marcus knew it wasn't true. The network that had formed around him, refugees, couriers, traders, civilians who had heard the stories and wanted to believe them, wasn't going to disappear.
If anything, it was growing stronger.
Dr. Kim seemed to read his thoughts. "You know you can't just walk away from this," she said.
"I can try." "You can.
But, Mr. Chen, there are children out there who are counting on the idea that someone like you exists."
People who need to believe that when monsters come, someone will stand up to them.
Marcus thought about Amy Grant, the little girl who had asked if he was the man who scared monsters. He thought about the young Crenali child who had touched his hand and stopped being afraid. He thought about his own daughter, safe on New Geneva, who trusted absolutely that her daddy always kept his promises. "What if I can't protect them all?" he asked quietly. "You can't," Dr. Kim said. "But you can try. And sometimes, trying is enough to change everything." The next morning, the wandering star dropped out of hyperspace in the Tau Ceti system. New Geneva appeared on the viewscreen, a blue-green jewel orbiting a stable yellow star. Home. But, as Marcus prepared to disembark, he received a message that would change everything. It was from Admiral Chen, his father. "Son, we need to talk. Immediately. Come to the fleet base before you go home. And, Marcus? Bring your civilian identification. Something tells me we're going to need to discuss your classification." As the shuttle carried him toward New Geneva, Marcus realized that his quiet life was over. The galaxy had noticed Marcus Chen, the civilian who made warships retreat. And the galaxy was not going to let him go home and pretend nothing had happened. Behind him, on the wandering star, Dr. Kim watched the shuttle disappear toward the planet's surface. She pulled out her personal communicator and made a call to a secure number. "This is Kim. I need to speak with Director Hayes." "Kim? I thought you retired." "I did. But I think I just met someone you need to know about. Someone who could change everything." "Who?" Dr. Kim looked at the datapad where she'd been tracking the passenger communications for the past week. Dozens of encrypted messages from across the galaxy, all mentioning the same name. "His name is Marcus Chen. And, Director, he's about to become the most important civilian in Coalition space." The conversation that followed would lead to decisions that would reshape the balance of power in 3 systems. But that was tomorrow's problem. Today, Marcus Chen just wanted to go home to his daughter's birthday party. The universe, it seemed, had other plans. The Coalition fleet base on New Geneva sprawled across 50 square kilometers of carefully maintained grassland, its gleaming towers and defensive installations a stark contrast to the civilian cities that dotted the rest of the planet. Marcus had grown up here, the son of a career military officer who had risen through the ranks to become one of the Coalition's most respected admirals. He hadn't been back to the base in 3 years. The security checkpoint recognized his biometrics immediately, but the young Marine on duty did a double. Behind his desk, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the training grounds where new recruits learned to serve the Coalition. Admiral Chen stood with his back to the door, watching a group of cadets practice formation flying in atmospheric fighters. He was a tall, lean man in his 70s, with silver hair and the kind of bearing that commanded respect without demanding it. He'd been Marcus's hero long before he became his father. "Hello, Dad," Marcus said. Admiral Chen turned, and Marcus was surprised to see worry in his eyes. "Marcus. Thank you for coming." The Admiral gestured to a chair across from his desk. "We need to discuss what happened at Omega 7. Marcus sat down. "I helped some refugees and faced down some bullies. Hardly worth a fleet intelligence briefing." "Is that how you see it?" Admiral Chen activated his desk display, and a series of reports filled the holographic space between them. "Because from where I sit, my son, a former Special Operations Division operative with enough classified skills to level a small city, has been wandering around the galaxy marked as a harmless civilian." Marcus looked at the reports. Incident summaries from Omega 7. Passenger manifests from the wandering star. Communication intercepts from a dozen different intelligence services. 3 different governments have opened active files on you, his father continued. The Vrex Empire has issued standing orders for their ships to avoid any vessel you're traveling on. The Caltharian warpriests have declared you a being of power walking in shadow. Admiral Chen paused. And, yesterday, the Zephyrian Council requested a formal meeting with you through diplomatic channels. Marcus raised an eyebrow. The Zephyrians want to meet with a civilian? That's just the beginning.
I've had calls from sector governors, trade guild leaders, and refugee advocacy groups. Everyone wants to know the same thing: who is Marcus Chen, and what does he want? I want to go home to Emma's birthday party. Admiral Chen smiled for the first time since Marcus had entered the office. And how is my granddaughter? She lost a tooth. She's very concerned about whether the tooth fairy has faster than light travel capabilities. Smart girl. Takes after her grandfather. The Admiral's expression grew serious again. Marcus, you can't just walk away from this. Why not? Because whether you intended it or not, you become a symbol. A civilian who can make warships retreat. A person with no official authority who somehow commands more respect than most generals. Admiral Chan leaned forward. Son, do you understand what you've accomplished? Marcus considered the question. I helped some people who needed help. You did it without using coalition resources, without invoking military authority, without threatening anyone with superior firepower. His father pulled up another display, this one showing refugee movement patterns across 3 systems. Do you see this? Marcus studied the data. Refugee populations are moving. They're moving toward any system where you've been reported. Marcus, you've accidentally created the largest civilian protection network in coalition history. The implications of that hit Marcus like a physical blow. That's not what I wanted. I know. But it's what happened. And now we need to decide what to do about it. Admiral Chen stood and walked to the windows overlooking the training grounds. There's something else. Something I probably should have told you years ago. Marcus waited. Your discharge from the Special Operations Division. It wasn't because of operational burnout. Dad. You were discharged because you scared people, Marcus. Not enemies, allies. Your superiors were concerned that you were becoming too effective. Too independent. Too willing to ignore orders when you thought they were wrong. Marcus remembered his last conversation with his commanding officer. A polite suggestion that perhaps civilian consulting would be a better fit for someone with his particular skills and moral flexibility. They were worried I'd go rogue. They were worried you already had. The Epsilon incident sealed it. Marcus closed his eyes. Epsilon Station. 30,000 civilians held hostage by separatist terrorists. Coalition Command had been prepared to write them off as acceptable losses rather than risk a larger conflict. Marcus had disagreed. Strongly. I saved those people, he said quietly. You disobeyed direct orders from 3 different generals and invaded a sovereign system with a black ops team that officially didn't exist. Admiral Chen turned back to his son. You were right to do it. But it terrified everyone above your pay grade. So they kicked me out and marked me as a civilian. They kicked you out and hoped you'd disappear into some quiet consulting job where you couldn't cause any more political problems. Admiral Chan smiled grimly. I don't think they anticipated you accidentally becoming the most influential civilian in known space. Marcus stood and joined his father at the window. Below them, young cadets practiced maneuvers that would prepare them for conflicts across the galaxy. They looked so young, so confident in their cause and their abilities. What do you think I should do? Marcus asked. I think, Admiral Chen said slowly, that the coalition needs someone like you. Someone who can accomplish things that the military can't. Someone who can help people without getting tangled up in politics and jurisdictional disputes. You want me to become some kind of unofficial troubleshooter. I want you to keep doing what you're already doing. But with support. Resources. A framework that lets you help people on a larger scale. Marcus considered this. What kind of framework? Admiral Chen activated another display, this one showing organizational charts and funding proposals. A new civilian protection initiative. Officially independent from military command, but with coalition backing. You'd have access to transport, communication networks, intelligence resources.
Everything you'd need to respond to situations like the one at Omega 7.
And, in return? You do what you've been doing. You help people. You stand up to bullies.
You protect refugees and civilians who fall through the cracks of official policy.
Marcus studied the proposal.
It was ambitious, well-funded, and would give him resources he'd never had access to even during his military service.
There's a catch, he said.
Of course there is.
You'd be working directly for me.
Your father, the admiral who's spent 40 years learning how to use the system to help people instead of just following orders blindly. Marcus looked at his father, really looked at him, and saw something he'd missed before.
The worry in Admiral Chan's eyes wasn't just about his son's safety. It was about the galaxy itself. Dad, what aren't you telling me? Admiral Chen was quiet for a long moment.
Then, he activated one final display, this one showing intelligence reports from across Coalition space.
The Vreks aren't the only ones getting aggressive. The Caltharian Empire is mobilizing fleets near the neutral zone.
Zephyrian war clans are raiding civilian shipping.
Half a dozen smaller powers are testing coalition resolve. Marcus studied the reports. They think we're weak. They think we're distracted.
Too focused on procedure and politics to respond effectively to threats.
Admiral Chen highlighted several incidents. Look at the pattern. They're targeting civilians.
Refugees, traders, colonies that are too small to merit military protection but too important to abandon.
They're testing our commitment to protecting non-combatants.
And every time we fail to respond effectively, they get bolder.
His father turned to face him.
Marcus, the coalition military is the finest fighting force in the galaxy.
But we're not designed to protect individual refugees or stop small-scale atrocities. We're designed to fight wars. Marcus began to understand. But I'm not. You're designed to protect people. To stand up to bullies.
To do the right thing regardless of political consequences.
Admiral Chen smiled. Son, you've spent the last week accidentally demonstrating exactly why the coalition needs someone like you.
Marcus walked back to his chair and sat down heavily.
This isn't what I wanted. I know.
But, Marcus, there are children out there who need someone to stand between them and the monsters.
Emma is safe because she's an admiral's granddaughter on a heavily defended world. But, what about all the other children? The ones on frontier colonies and refugee stations?
Marcus thought about Amy Grant, who had asked if he was the man who scared monsters. He thought about the young Krenali girl who had touched his hand and stopped being afraid.
If I do this, I do it my way.
No military hierarchy, no political oversight, no committees deciding who deserves help.
Agreed. I want full operational independence.
If I think someone needs help, I help them, regardless of whose toes I step on.
Done. And I want to go home for my daughter's birthday party. Admiral Chen laughed, the sound genuine and relieved.
Marcus, that party doesn't start for 6 hours.
You'll be there.
As if summoned by some paternal instinct, Marcus's personal communicator chimed with an incoming call.
Emma's face appeared on the screen, gap-toothed grin lighting up the display. Daddy! Grandma says you're at Grandpa's office. Hi, sweetheart. Yes, I'm talking with Grandpa about work. Are you coming to my party? I promised I would, didn't I?
You always keep your promises, Emma said with absolute certainty. After the call ended, Admiral Chen looked at his son with something like pride.
She's right, you know. You do always keep your promises. Marcus stood up. Then, I'd better get going. I have a birthday party to attend. Marcus.
His father's voice stopped him at the door.
The authorization codes for the new initiative will be in your personal files by tomorrow morning.
Along with contact information for people who can help you when you need resources.
Marcus nodded. Dad? Thank you. For understanding. Thank you for being exactly who you are. Even when it scares people.
As Marcus left the fleet base and headed for his childhood home, he realized that his life had just changed in ways he couldn't fully comprehend. But that was tomorrow's concern. Today, he had a birthday party to attend. Emma met him at the front door of the modest house where he'd grown up, throwing herself into his arms with the unrestrained enthusiasm that only 7-year-olds possessed.
"Daddy! You made it! I promised I would. Are you going to tell me stories about space?"
Marcus looked at his daughter, safe, happy, surrounded by family and friends who loved her, and made a decision that would echo across the galaxy. "I'll tell you about protecting people," he said. "About standing up to bullies and helping those who can't help themselves."
"Like superheroes?" Marcus smiled. "Something like that." The party was exactly what a 7-year-old's birthday party should be. Games and cake and presents and children laughing in the backyard while adults watched from the deck and tried to remember what it felt like to believe that the world was fundamentally safe. But, even as Marcus played with his daughter and her friends, he was aware of the messages accumulating on his personal communicator. Refugee advocates requesting meetings. Civilian traders asking for protection. Parents of missing children begging for help that their governments couldn't or wouldn't provide. Dr. Sarah Kim had been right. He couldn't just walk away from this.
That evening, after the last guest had gone home and Emma had fallen asleep clutching her new stuffed animal, Marcus sat on the back deck with his father and stepmother, watching the stars appear in New Geneva's clear sky.
"So," Admiral Chen said quietly. "Ready to become the most wanted man in civilian space?"
"I'm ready to keep my promises," Marcus replied.
His father nodded. That's all anyone can ask. High above them, in the orbital traffic lanes surrounding New Geneva, ships were already beginning to gather.
Refugee transports that had changed course when word spread that Marcus Chen was in the system. Civilian traders who wanted to offer their services to the man who had faced down Vrex warships. Representatives from advocacy groups who hoped to convince him to take on their causes. By morning, there would be more than 50 vessels in orbit, all waiting to speak with the civilian who had accidentally become the most influential non-government figure in coalition space. But, tonight, Marcus Chen was just a father who had kept his promise to be at his daughter's birthday party.
Everything else could wait until tomorrow.
Inside the house, Emma Chen slept peacefully, secure in the absolute certainty that her daddy would always protect her from the monsters. She didn't know that her daddy was about to become the person that other children across the galaxy would depend on for that same protection. But she would understand, when she was older, why her father had chosen to keep promises to children he'd never met, in star systems he'd never seen.
Because some promises are worth keeping, no matter what they cost.
And Marcus Chen had always been very good at keeping his promises. Marcus woke to the sound of his personal communicator buzzing with incoming messages. The display showed 47 unread priority communications, 12 emergency contact requests, and a formal diplomatic invitation from the Zephyrian Council that had arrived sometime during the night. It was 6 in the morning on New Geneva, and the galaxy was already demanding his attention. Through his bedroom window, he could see the orbital traffic display showing an unprecedented cluster of civilian vessels in the system. Word had spread faster than he'd expected. The refugee networks, courier guilds, and trader associations had all put out the word that Marcus Chen was home. He dressed quietly, not wanting to wake Emma, and made his way to the kitchen where his stepmother was already brewing coffee and monitoring the morning news feeds. "Morning, Marcus," she said without turning around.
"You're famous."
The main display showed footage from Coalition News Service, with his academy graduation photo prominently featured alongside shots of the refugee camp on Omega 7.
Coalition officials remained tight-lipped about the civilian who reportedly convinced 3 Vrex battleships to retreat without firing a shot, the reporter was saying. Even from the planet's surface, the orbital traffic was visible as bright points of light that hadn't been there the night before.
"Some people heard I was home and wanted to say hello," he said carefully.
Emma considered this with 7-year-old logic. "Must be a lot of people."
"Yeah, sweetheart.
A lot of people."
After breakfast and the morning routine of getting Emma ready for school, Marcus finally had time to review the accumulated messages. Most were requests for help, refugee families asking for protection, civilian traders requesting escort through dangerous space, planetary governors begging for assistance with problems their own security forces couldn't handle. But there were three messages that stood out from the rest. The first was from Director Helen Hayes of Coalition Civilian Affairs, the department responsible for non-military humanitarian operations. It was brief and, to the point. Mr. Chen, we need to discuss your new role immediately. When can you come to headquarters? The second was from Captain Voss at Omega 7, Marcus, thought you should know, the station has been completely peaceful since the Vrex incident. Word is out that this is under your protection. No one wants to cause trouble where you might show up. Hope you're ready for what comes next. The third message made his blood run cold. It was a video transmission from an unknown sender, showing grainy footage of a coalition civilian transport under attack by unknown raiders. The timestamp indicated it was less than 12 hours old. Mr. Chen, a voice said over the footage, my name is Captain Elena Vasquez. I command the civilian transport Hope's Journey. We are currently under siege by raiders in the Kepler Nebula. 43 passengers, including 18 children. Our escort abandoned us when the shooting started. The video showed chaos inside the transport, families huddled in corridors, crew members trying to maintain order, the ship shaking under weapons fire. The raiders are demanding our cargo and passengers. They say they'll space anyone who resists. Captain Vasquez's voice was steady, but Marcus could hear the fear underneath. Mr. Chen, if even half the stories about you are true, these people need your help. Coordinates attached. Please. The transmission cut off. Marcus stared at the screen for a long moment, then activated his emergency communicator and placed a call to his father. Admiral Chen's office. This is Marcus. I need to speak with him immediately. Marcus? His father's voice came on the line. What's wrong? I need emergency transport to the Kepler Nebula. How fast can Coalition fleet get me there? What's the situation? Marcus forwarded the video message. 43 civilians under attack by raiders. They're asking for my help specifically. There was a pause while Admiral Chen reviewed the footage. Son, the Kepler Nebula is outside Coalition jurisdiction. If you respond to this, you'll be operating completely on your own. I understand. The fastest ship I can get you is a courier vessel. 4 hours to Kepler at maximum burn. Do it. Marcus, you realize this is exactly what we talked about yesterday. Once you respond to something like this, there's no going back. Every desperate situation in the galaxy is going to end up on your doorstep. Marcus thought about the children on that transport, huddled in corridors while raiders decided their fate. Dad, I made promises. To Emma, to the Crenali family, to everyone who's started depending on me to stand between them and the monsters. He paused. I keep my promises. I know you do. Transport will be ready in 20 minutes. And, Marcus? I'm sending you with full Coalition backing. If anyone asks, you're operating under direct authority from Fleet Command. Thank you. The courier ship Swift Arrow was the fastest vessel in the Coalition fleet, designed to carry priority communications and personnel across vast distances in minimum time. Marcus had never traveled in anything like it. The acceleration alone was enough to make him grateful for the medical support systems built into the passenger compartment. Captain Rodriguez, the ship's commander, was a veteran courier pilot with the kind of steady competence that came from years of high-risk, high-speed missions. Sir, we'll have you in the Kepler Nebula in 3 hours 57 minutes, she reported. But, I should warn you, sensor readings show at least 4 hostile vessels in the area. Whatever you're planning to do when we get there, I hope it doesn't involve a fair fight. Marcus was reviewing everything he could find about the raiders operating in the Kepler Nebula. They called themselves the Iron Fist Syndicate, a collection of pirates and mercenaries who preyed on civilian shipping in areas where Coalition patrols were thin. Their leader was a Threx named Gornak, a former military officer who had been dishonorably discharged for excessive violence against prisoners. Intelligence reports suggested he commanded a small fleet of well-armed ships crewed by beings with similar backgrounds. Under normal circumstances, dealing with the Iron Fist would require a coalition task force. Multiple warships, extensive planning, political authorization that could take weeks to obtain. Marcus had 3 hours and 57 minutes. He spent the time studying the tactical situation and making calls to contacts across the galaxy. By the time they dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler Nebula, he had a plan. It wasn't a particularly good plan, but it was the plan he had. The Hope's journey appeared on their screens immediately, a civilian transport dead in space and surrounded by 4 raider vessels. The pirates had positioned themselves to prevent any escape attempt, and their weapons were trained on the transport's critical systems. "Unknown vessel, this is Captain Gornak of the Iron Fist Syndicate," came a harsh voice over the communication channel. "You will withdraw immediately or be destroyed." Marcus activated the transmitter. "Captain Gornak, this is Marcus Chen. I believe you have some passengers I'd like to speak with." The silence that followed stretched for nearly a minute. The human Chen, Gornak's voice finally returned, but something had changed in his tone. "We have heard of you." "I hope so. I'm here to collect the civilians on that transport. These civilians owe us compensation for passage through our territory. They cannot leave until debts are paid." "Captain Gornak, let me explain the situation clearly. You have 43 civilians, including 18 children. I'm here to take them home. You can release them peacefully, or I can take them from you. Your choice." The laughter that came through the speakers was genuinely amused. "Chen human, you travel in a single courier ship with no weapons. I command 4 warships with enough firepower to reduce the transport to atoms. What exactly do you think you can accomplish?" Marcus looked at Captain Rodriguez, who was monitoring the tactical display with professional interest. "Captain, how long until the Caltharian warfleet arrives?" Rodriguez checked her instruments. "Caltharian vessels?" "Sir, I don't show any." Marcus held up a hand to silence her, keeping the communication channel open. "The Caltharians should be dropping out of hyperspace in about 6 minutes, Marcus said conversationally. "After that, you'll have the Zephyrian light cruisers arriving in about 12 minutes. The Deltan Defense Force is running a bit late, probably 15 minutes. "You're bluffing," Gornak snarled, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Captain, I spent the last 3 hours making some calls. It's amazing how many people owe favors to refugees and traitors. And how many military commanders get very upset when they hear about pirates attacking civilian transports." Marcus checked his chronometer. "You have about 5 minutes to release those passengers and clear out of this system. After that, you'll be dealing with a very angry coalition of forces that want to discuss your career choices. This is impossible. No one responds this quickly to random attacks on civilian shipping." "You're right. Under normal circumstances, it would take weeks to organize this kind of response." Marcus paused. "But these aren't normal circumstances. I asked for help, and people said yes." The communication channel fell silent again. Captain Rodriguez leaned over to Marcus. "Sir, are there really multiple fleets coming?" "I certainly hope so," Marcus replied quietly. "Because if not, we're all about to have a very bad day." As if summoned by his words, space around the nebula began to shimmer as ships dropped out of hyperspace. First came the Caltharian war vessels, their crystalline hulls reflecting the nebula's glow like deadly prisms. Then, the Zephyrian cruisers, sleek and predatory, taking positions that would cut off any escape routes. Finally, a squadron of Deltan patrol ships, smaller than the others but armed with some of the most advanced targeting systems in known space. In less than 2 minutes, the Iron Fist Syndicate found themselves facing a fleet that outgunned them by approximately 10 to 1. "Captain Gornak," Marcus said into the stunned silence, "I believe we were discussing the release of those passengers." What happened next would become legend in the civilian protection networks. Captain Gornak, faced with overwhelming force that had appeared seemingly from nowhere, chose discretion over valor. The Iron Fist ships withdrew to minimum safe distance and released the Hope's journey without further incident.
But, as the civilian transport limped toward the rescue fleet, Gornak made one last transmission. "Chun-Human, how did you summon warships from 3 different governments in less than 4 hours?" Marcus considered the question. The truth was that he'd spent the journey making desperate calls to every contact he could think of. Admiral Chen had used his influence with coalition allies to request emergency assistance. Dr. Kim had contacted former colleagues in Caltharian medical services who owed her favors from the war. The refugee networks had reached out to Deltan humanitarian organizations that supported civilian protection. It had been a desperate gamble that had somehow worked. "Captain Gornak," Marcus said finally, "sometimes when you help people, they remember. And, sometimes when you need help, they come running." The rescue operation that followed was swift and efficient. The Hope's journey as passengers were transferred to medical ships for treatment, the damaged transport was taken under tow, and the various military vessels began the process of coordinating their withdrawal from neutral space. But, before the fleet dispersed, something unprecedented happened. Captain Thelvar of the Caltharian war vessel Crystal Sword requested a direct communication with Marcus. "Human Shen," the alien commander said, her translated voice carrying formal respect, "the war priests have asked me to deliver a message." "I'm listening." "You are no longer classified as merely civilian in Caltharian records. You are now listed as Guardian of the Small Ones. This is a title of great honor among my people." Commander Nexus of the Zephyrian fleet added his own message, "The war clans have voted. You are granted safe passage through all Zephyrian space, and any who threaten those under your protection will face our wrath." Even the Deltan squadron commander chimed in, "The Humanitarian Council has authorized me to offer full support for your civilian protection operations. Whatever you need, whenever you need it." As the rescue fleet dispersed, Captain Rodriguez turned to Marcus with an expression of amazement. "Sir, in 15 years of courier service, I've never seen anything like that. 3 different governments just pledged military support to a civilian." Marcus looked out at the stars, thinking about his daughter back on New Geneva, and about all the children across the galaxy who needed someone to stand between them and the monsters. "Captain, I don't think I'm just a civilian anymore. What are you then?" Marcus considered the question as they jumped to hyperspace, carrying the rescued passengers toward safety. "I'm someone who keeps promises," he said finally. "Even when they're impossible to keep." Behind them, in the Kepler Nebula, Captain Gornak reported to his superiors that the Iron Fist Syndicate would no longer target civilian vessels in Coalition space. When asked why, he said simply, "Because Marcus Chen exists." It was the first time in recorded history that pirates had changed their operating procedures because one man had asked them politely to stop hurting children. It would not be the last. 6 months later, Marcus Chen stood in the observation deck of the newly commissioned civilian vessel Promise Keeper, watching a convoy of refugee ships make their way through the hyperspace lanes toward safety. The ship had been a gift from the Coalition Council, officially designated as a Civilian Protection Command Vessel, though everyone simply called it Marcus's ship. It was equipped with the finest communication arrays, defensive systems, and diplomatic facilities that Coalition technology could provide. "Sir, we're receiving priority communications from 7 different systems," reported Lieutenant Sarah Kim, Dr. Kim's daughter, who had requested transfer from Coalition Medical to serve as his communications officer. "The situation on Proxima Colony has stabilized, the refugee convoy from Crenali Prime has reached Sanctuary Station safely, and the pirate activity near the Zephyrian border has completely ceased." Marcus nodded, reviewing the status reports on his personal display. In the past 6 months, he had responded to 43 separate crises across Coalition space and beyond. Each intervention had been different, sometimes requiring diplomatic negotiation, sometimes calling in favors from unlikely allies, and occasionally necessitating the kind of direct action that reminded everyone why his civilian classification had always been misleading. But the pattern was always the same: people in trouble called for help, and somehow Marcus found a way to provide it. "Any word from Emma?" he asked. "Your daughter sent a video message this morning. She wanted to show you her science project about faster-than-light communication." Marcus smiled. Emma was now 8 years old, and she had decided that if her daddy was going to travel between star systems helping people,
she needed to understand how communications worked so she could talk to him no matter how far away he was. The door to the observation deck chimed, and Captain Elena Vasquez entered. She had been commander of the Hope's Journey when Marcus rescued her passengers from the Iron Fist Syndicate, and she had requested assignment to his crew the moment the Promise Keeper was commissioned. "Marcus, we've got a situation developing in the Centauri system. The Vrex are making aggressive moves near the civilian shipping lanes."
Marcus turned from the window. "The same Vrex who've been avoiding any system I'm in for the past 6 months? That's what makes this interesting. They're specifically requesting to meet with you. Under formal diplomatic protocol." This was unprecedented.
The Vrex Empire had maintained strict orders for their ships to avoid any area where Marcus might be present. The idea that they would actively seek a meeting was both intriguing and concerning.
"What do they want to discuss?" Captain Vasquez handed him a formal diplomatic communication. "They want to negotiate a treaty."
Marcus read the document with growing amazement.
The Vrex Empire was proposing a formal agreement that would establish protocols for civilian protection throughout the disputed territories along their border.
In exchange, they were requesting Marcus's assistance in dealing with what they called a situation requiring expertise in impossible problems.
"Captain, when did the Vrex Empire start asking humans for help with impossible problems?"
According to Admiral Chen, it started about the time they realized that you've somehow managed to create an informal peacekeeping network that spans half the galaxy. Marcus looked out at the refugee convoy again. Ships from a dozen different species, all traveling safely through space that had been actively hostile just months earlier. The convoy was escorted by vessels from the Caltharian warfleets, Zephyrian patrol ships, and Coalition scouts, an unprecedented cooperation that existed solely because everyone involved trusted Marcus to keep his promises.
"Prepare a response to the Vrex.
Tell them I'll meet with their representatives, but the meeting happens in neutral space, and I'm bringing friends."
"How many friends?" Marcus considered the question. "All of them."
3 weeks later, the most unusual diplomatic gathering in galactic history convened in the empty space between the Vrex Empire and Coalition territory. Marcus arrived aboard the Promise Keeper, accompanied by what could only be described as an entire fleet of civilian protection vessels.
There were Caltharian warships whose commanders had sworn personal oaths to defend any children under Marcus's protection. Zephyrian cruisers commanded by officers who considered him an honorary war chief.
Deltan medical vessels crewed by beings who had seen him risk his life to save strangers. But, perhaps most importantly, there were the civilian ships.
Refugee transports, trader vessels, courier ships, hundreds.